everyone. Welcome to those who haven't been here before, and welcome back to those who have watched before. Thanks for coming again. My name is Leah Langley, and we're here to discuss the books I read in May 2025. I read 6 books in May. I have a good amount to say about a couple of them. But right before I get into it, I wanted just to remind everyone you could find me on Goodreads and follow me there to see what I'm reading, check the highlights and notes I make on particular books. I get most of my books from the library, but I try to get the Kindle version as well because Goodreads can keep my highlights and things like that, all that good stuff, my full reviews, all that stuff. Go check it out there at Leah Langley. All right, let's dive right in. So the first book I read in May 2025 actually is my 18th book for the year, is Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. This is the 6th Emily Henry novel that I've read. I've been reading. She puts out a book every year, and I've read every single one of them the past several years. I started reading her books in 2022. I read 3 that year, and then every year since I've read the book. So the books I read have been Beach Read, People We Meet on Vacation, Book Lovers, which is my favorite of all of them, Happy Place, and Funny Story, which I read June last year. And I'll link that book video below because I talked about that one. So yeah, a new book came out. I knew I was going to read it because, like I said, I'm going to continue to read the Emily Henry books. This, though, was the lowest I've rated an Emily Henry novel. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. Just didn't really connect with me. The premise was interesting and intriguing. The premise of this book is like 2 writers are competing to be the biographer for this heiress. And no shocker for anyone who's read any Emily Henry books before, they fall in love over the course of this kind of like month-long trial they have. So I didn't really get into the 2 of them, Alice and Hayden, or the people we're following, but also I never got into the heiress. They were covering Margaret Ives, or her story really. We were mostly we were getting the story through Alice. And as I was reading it, as it was going, I was kind of like, I feel like Emily Henry is trying to do a little like Evelyn Hugo-esque type take. And it wasn't working. And Evelyn Hugo is a reference to this book, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is one of my favorite books. I have it behind me. And I was kind of just like, this is not, felt like it was trying to be that. Because in Evelyn Hugo, it's like there's a person basically writing the book of Evelyn Hugo, writing the biography. And also, after I wrote my review on Goodreads, I was reading a couple other reviews that people had on there. And I saw someone put like, she was trying to reheat Evelyn Hugo's nachos, and it didn't work, and it made me laugh. So some other people felt the same way who've kind of read it. So there's that, and then at the end, kind of like the big twist or big reveal was an interesting twist, and it reminds you how strong NDAs are, but it didn't. And I will always be remaining spoiler-free, but it didn't hit me. It kind of felt kind of cringe to some level, and maybe because I wasn't interested or like engaged as much with like the characters or whatever it was, or invested maybe would be the better word, and also kind of felt kind of rushed. It was like, okay, we have to get to the end here. So yeah, that was just me. Didn't like this book that much, but when Emily Henry likely comes out with the book again next year, I will be there. We're going to continue on with her books as they continue to come through. So yeah, that's book 1 for May. Book 2 for May, and the 19th of the year, is Next of Kin by Kia Abdullah. This book here, if you couldn't tell by my claps already, one of my favorite novels I've read in quite some time. 5 out of 5 stars. I liked it so much. I'm going to read the synopsis for you because the synopsis is really what grabbed me when this book was first like brought to me as something I was going to be reading. Layla Sayed receives a call that cleaves her life in 2. Her brother-in-law's voice is filled with panic. He's at his son's nursery to pick up Max, but he isn't there. Leia was supposed to drop Max off that morning, but she forgot. Racing to the car park, she grasps the horror of what she's done. Max has been locked in her car for 3 hours on the hottest day of the year. But she's too late. What follows is an explosive, high-profile trial that will tear the family apart. But as the case progresses, it becomes clear there's more to the incident than meets the eye. This book is really quite the whirlwind. You know those kind of books that give you some type of emotion where you're reading it, you're sitting up, you're sitting up as you're reading it, or like you scream, or like you want to call people right away who maybe read it, or you want to just recommend it to people. This was that book for me, certainly. Like, as I was going through it, I was just like, like I said, the description, if you heard that just then, that's quite, the story happening there. But this book was so, there's so much with it. And it just immediately grabs your attention, and you're just like on this this roller coaster. That's certainly how I was reading it, mouth hung open. So we have, like I mentioned, Layla Sayed, who the book centers on, but we have Max, who is her nephew, who is being left in the car. Andrew, who's her brother-in-law. Her sister Yasmin, who is Max's mother, and also Will is Layla's husband. So those are kind of like the four main people we're kind of with. And yeah, from the very first page of the book, and I will say I'm going to continue on here. You know, I always will not do spoilers, but this is a book certainly that it's one you want to talk about, and it's kind of like it's hard to still talk about this book knowing what I know, but I will remain spoiler free. This is honestly a book I probably could do like another video on and just talk about the book in full and give full thoughts and things like that. But from the very first page of the book, you sense some tension between Layla and Yasmin, so it's kind of like an interesting start to like what's going to unfold. And you see the tension kind of grow as the trial goes on, kind of naturally, I guess you can tell, because, you know, someone has passed here. And there are a lot of reveals in this book, some big, some small, and kind of part 3 of this book is 3 chapters, and it's like the end of it, and the trial ends like at the end of part 2, and part 3, you know, it was just like full speed to the max. When I was reading it, I was already, like, as I was nearing the end, I was thinking, okay, I'm probably gonna give this like maybe a 4.5 out of 5, really good book, whatever, which was really still a high rating. And then obviously you see I gave it a full 5 stars. And that's because really those last 3 chapters, as well as I was reading, I was going to read the first chapter of the final 3, and then I was like, oh no, I have to keep going. So I like kept going because it's one of those things where you cannot stop at that point. And I was reading, and like my mouth was just like at every turn. And it's just one of those books as well. I think if you read it a second time, even in this couple weeks since I've read it, talking to people about it who've read it and like maybe realizing like, oh, you remember when this happened in the book? It's like, oh, you kind of put things together, or like where that was, it like a foreshadowing or whatever it was. And you kind of think you come to some conclusions as you're going along, like, oh, this is going to happen, it's going to be this twist, or yada yada, whatever. You might think you have something worked out, you don't, because you're wrong. So like you're going to keep trying to think you have it, and you're wrong. So, or you're going to just be punched with something else right after you figure out maybe one thing. And it's just quite the ride. I cannot recommend this book enough. Of novels I read, it's one of the highest recommendations I have. As I was reading, right after I finished too, I was thinking about, I actually made a video after I read it. I can link that one below too, kind of trying to recommend it to people, because again, it's one of those books where you right away want to talk about it. You right away want to just like, you know, do the whole thing. And I haven't felt this way about a novel in a little bit. And the last was, I think, about having this kind of reaction on me, or Black Cake, and 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. So this one was right up in there. I need to actually buy this book, so I have it. I want it in my own personal library. Read the book. Yeah, you've heard me talk here, but it's best to go in, and I didn't spoil anything, but it's best to go on, you know, almost as blind as you can be, other than the description that I've kind of given you, and just taking all the surprises. This was a book we read for the book club I'm a part of, and the discussion we had was really great. And it was one of those things where after you finish reading it, people can talk about it a lot, and you kind of piece things together, and the whole kind of thing. There's so much, and this book is excellent. All right, book 3 for May 2025, 20 overall for the year, is Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This was Chimamanda's first novel, this was published in 2002. I've read several bits of Chimamanda's work, like Americana here. Is a book that came out 2019, 2020, and I read it around then. It's a novel. It's a really great novel. I read that one. I think that was my first book of hers I read. And I also read We Should All Be Feminists, and then I read Notes on Grief. All great books. Notes on Grief in particular, I remember reading that at a time I knew I needed to read that. And it was just great. All those books, I'm pretty sure I gave all of those books 5 stars when I read them. And I have like this kind of Chimamanda shelf. And I got this book because she has a new novel out called Dream Count. It's called Dream Count. And when that book came out, it was like her first novel in a while. And I was like, oh, Chimamanda, like, there's some other, it reminded me about some other books of hers that I wanted to read. So I like went and bought like 4 like something like novels of hers that I hadn't read. And I have them over here, as well as those ones those other books I've already read of hers. So I'm a fan, and you probably will see Chimamanda's name later on this year, because there's some other ones I have that I hope to kind of check out. But I want to start with her first novel, and then I'll get all the way up to the one that was just released recently. So yeah, let me talk about this book. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. I'm gonna start with the quote, actually. Jaja's defiance seemed to me now like Auntie Ephema's experimental purple hibiscus, rare, fragrant, with the undertones of freedom, a different kind of freedom from the one the crowds waving green leaves chanted at Government Square after the coup, a freedom to be, to do. So, like I said, this is her first novel. It's very much like a coming of age, coming to consciousness novel. We follow a 15-year-old Kambali and her older brother Jaja. They live a privileged life in Nigeria. Our narrator Kambali breaks down this perception that some others have of the family, as we kind of learn from her perspective, like of her life, particularly of her father, who she calls Papa, who's a well-respected man in the community, but he's profoundly religious and a tyrannical man in this silent and suffocating home. Kambali and Jaja are sent away to live with their aunt outside the city as the country is going under a military coup, and they each discover a life beyond the confines of their father's authority. There's laughter, joy, and freedom in the house. This is another quote here. It was what Auntie Ephema did to my cousins. I realized then, setting higher and higher jumps for them in the way she talked to them and what she expected of them. She did it all the time, believing they would scale the rod. They did it, and they did it. It was different for Jaja and me. We did not scale the rod because we believed we could. We scaled it because we were terrified that we couldn't. Kind of, again, thinking about this, like, again, this laughter, joy, and freedom in the house that they didn't have, and thinking about, like, their encouragement their aunt was giving their cousins, and they were maybe more doing things in terms of being scared from their father and things like that. So after experiencing this, like, enlightening time away, they come back home, and the tensions grow further, kind of naturally, because they've been exposed more, and they see how it can be different. And there's a critical moment in the book that changes the family's life, and they're still, after that moment happens, you see, like, they're still each dealing with trauma, both Kambali and Jaja, but also their mother as well, and just there's just trauma in the family, trauma and scars. And the book ends in a hopeful way, though, which I liked, and I gave it 3.5 out of 5 because parts of this book dragged for me, I guess maybe would be the term, and in the final third in particular is where it kind of like got better and I felt more engaged. But overall, I think it was a good book. Like I said, it's her first novel. I'm looking forward to reading some more Chimamanda's stuff. She's great. Also, I will just say quickly, some of you might have recognized that name potentially. I think I first heard Chimamanda because in Beyonce's song Flawless, there's a moment in the song where Chimamanda's it's like a clip of her audio from a speech she gave talking about what feminism is. And in the song it's Flawless, and it says featuring Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. That's how I first heard about her, and then obviously I've read some work of hers since, so you might know her name, you might know the song. She's great. All right, next book is, what is this, book 4 for the month of May, and 21 for the year is The System, Who Rigged It, How We Fix It by Robert Reich. A couple months ago, I bought kind of the stack of economics type text. I was interested in reading some more text like that, and this is one of the books I bought in that period, and I'll take a picture and put it up here so you could see what books I got. This is the first one I've read of that stack. This is a must read. It was published in early 2021, and amazingly or terrifyingly, the system feels even more broken now than it was when this book was published. Quote here, today, the great divide is not between left and right, it's between democracy and oligarchy. As Reich lays out several steps that have led us to this place in this broken system. I have another quote here I want to read. The increasing concentration of wealth and power at the top has created an education system in which the super rich can buy admission to college for their children, a political system in which they can buy Congress and the presidency, an information ecosystem in which they can buy public opinion, a healthcare system in which they could buy care others can't, and a justice system in which they can buy their way out of jail. Sound familiar? Don't assume, another quote here, that we're locked in a battle between capitalism and socialism. We already have socialism for the very rich. Most Americans are subject to harsh capitalism. Anybody truly paying attention knows we were headed this way a long time ago, or even after certain particular events unfolded, you kind of immediately are kind of like, this is not good. I think now and then, I was thinking about it as this book was going, Keith Olbermann's comments in 2010 when SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, decided Citizens United versus FEC. You might have heard this before, but Citizens United was a a landmark case, really, that basically allowed businesses to have like no cap on political donations and kind of almost gave them rights as like individual citizens. You've heard that talk. You might have heard Citizens United before talk about a lot. Robert Wright talks about it in the book a little bit. And Keith Olbermann, he had a TV show at this time, and when the decision was decided in 2010, he on his program, he basically talks about how like he basically just like predicted a lot of, he was bang on predicting with a lot was basically what's going to happen, and noting how crucial this day was, and kind of like raising the alarm flag, like, oh wow, like John Roberts, who was then and is now the Chief Justice of the court. I believe it was like a 5-4 decision. It was like he was like basically the swing vote to get it over, and I'm gonna link that below. It's like a 10-minute clip. If you hear that now, you think in 2010, you're listening to it in 2025 or whenever you listen to this, it's like, oh wow, he was bang on. And I was thinking about that the other day, and after I finished this book, I actually rewatched that segment, and yeah. Again, another quote here. Reich focuses on the oligarchy a lot, often reminding the reader, the quote starts here, the biggest political divide in America today is not between Republicans and Democrats, it's between democracy and oligarchy. Hearing and using the same old labels prevents most people from noticing they're being shafted. So that quote was similar to the quote I read earlier, where, again, he's really trying to focus on it's not a left or right thing. Stop focusing on that. You're not looking at what the actual problem is. And thinking about this a lot, sometimes people, they point like next to them kind of thing, where he's more so like you need to be pointing up. You need to be actually looking at what the problem is. And sometimes people get so like in their corners and they think it's just that corner over there doesn't like me, where more so it's like the person who owns the room is the one that's controlling the situation or whatever it is. And he's really like trying to like get you to realize that if you don't realize it already. Wright calls out Jamie Dimon, who's the chairman and CEO of JP Morgan Chase, several times throughout the book, and others like him, like those are part of the Business Roundtable, which Dimon chairs, which is like a lobby group in DC filled with like CEOs and executives of these big companies. But he focuses, however, on Dimon the most, and I think for several reasons he does this, but one is kind of his hypocrisy. A quote here. Yet, for all his liberal outspokenness, Dimon never mentions America's growing concentration of wealth and power and the tight connection between the two. He doesn't talk about the role of big money in persuading the public they should vote for particular candidates or against others, support or oppose specific legislation, be concerned about this problem or that, or be concerned about this problem or that, or believe one set of facts or another. He doesn't mention how wealth buys access to politicians and sometimes even their votes, or how the prospect of lucrative jobs on Wall Street upon retirement might tempt some public officials to pull their punches. And he starts and ends the book with Dimon, basically like talking about him in the beginning, and ends with the letter. The lighting's gonna be a little different. I just closed my windows. But back to that, reading that quote just now had me thinking about something else, about kind of this hypocrisy and kind of how people are not pointing at the actual issue. Rutger Bregman, who is this Dutch historian and author, I thought about him because he was on the Daily Show the other day, and they brought up this moment from years ago where, or it reminded me of this moment because they brought it up, where he was at Davos, Switzerland, for like the World Economic Forum they do yearly, this annual meeting with all these like huge, massive, rich people, business owners, whatever, and other people as well. At this conference, he was on a panel and he was sitting there talking to this room with these other people, and he was like, we're talking a lot about philanthropy and like how, or people like these businesses are presenting how they're so like what they're doing in that space, but we're not talking about the actual problem, which is taxes. We need to be taxing more people and like or taxing these companies and these people more. And he was just like, what? Like I feel like I'm at like a conference with firefighters and we can't talk about water. Like it was like this very much like in this moment that was like it went all around when that happened, and I don't think he's been invited back since. And he was even saying like I was at there's this panel I'm talking about now. There was like another panel a talk I was at earlier this week, and there's like 15 people in the room, and like no one wanted to talk about it. So thinking about the hypocrisy with some of these people who it's like they're not stupid. They know what's going on. They know how the tax rate is, or like what it is, but they want to point at other things that are actually not going to move the needle it needs to be moved at. So Reich starts and ends the book with Jamie Dimon. And I think it's good because it's, if you don't know already, before reading this book, you certainly know by the end that the needle doesn't really get moved without people like Diamond having like action and support in this space, because you need people with massive wealth and power to actually like to help us move the needle, basically. So I liked that. Even though he mentions Diamond a few times, he doesn't particularly like blame one person or a party or occurrence. Reich points out several different things that brought us up to this point, and kind of get us sped up to like where we are. And then the final part of the book is discussing how we can overcome oligarchy in the United States. And this is a quote here from the end. "I hope I've convinced you that you must at least try. Few things we possess and will hand to our children and grandchildren are more precious than our democracy. Few things we believe in will affect the lives of our children and grandchildren more fundamentally than our commitment to a fair and just society. That precious possession and that fundamental idea are both gravely endangered. They can be protected only by engaged citizens who know the truth and are willing to fight to reclaim our democracy. The challenge we face is large and complex, but I do want to remind you how resilient America has been and how well situated we are for the fight ahead. The forces of greed and hate would prefer you to give up fighting for a more just society, because that way they win. And we have no choice but to continue the fight." And that call for action there is really why this book is a must read in my eyes. And I think once more people wake up to what's happening, instead of blaming the person, like I said, kind of like next to them or that group or whatever it is people like to focus on, the quicker we could tackle the large and complex challenge of uprooting this broken system. Because if you really didn't know it was broken, I wish to be in the world you're living in, but it's very much broken. And not just the United States, there's a lot of places that are really messed up. But obviously Robert Reich is from here and focusing on here. Speaking on a quick note from him, I don't even know if I said this at the beginning, but let me say it now. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I might not have even said that. But a quick note on Robert Reich. I have heard of him because he has like quite the social media presence. But I didn't like actually know like who he was or whatever like that. But in the early parts of the book, or some part of the book, he had said he used to be Secretary of Labor, and from 93 to 97. And I was like, oh wow, I didn't even know that. I will say in my defense, he, people were like, how did you miss that he was Secretary of Labor? I was like, I think 6 months old when he left his position, so whatever. But the point is, the man clearly knows this stuff. This is an excellent book for people who need to wake up, people who are already woken up and just need to hear some more facts, whatever. Great book. I'm happy I read it. It's definitely one I would recommend to many. All right, what is this? Book 5? Read book 5? Yeah, book 5 of May 2025. Book 22 for the year is Daydream by Hannah Grace. This is Maple Hills series. This is Maple Hills 3. I've read Icebreaker. I have them back here. Just probably can't see them, but they're just like there. I have Icebreaker, which is the first one, and Wildfire, which is the second one. I did a video on Wildfire because I went Wildfire in March 2024, so I'll link that one below. And Icebreaker I read a couple months before. So another Maple Hills series. Maple Hills is like, they're all at the same college and they're all kind of connected in a different way. Usually playing hockey is kind of the main thing for maybe the guys in the book. So the book focuses on Henry, who we've met in previous books, and two likable characters who, I should say Hallie is the woman in this book. Two likable characters, and as they do in Maple Hills, they fall in love, which is what we're kind of used to at this point. They begin as friends and grow into more. Hallie is like a people pleaser and the eldest sister, which you point to a lot. And that storyline, I feel like, is kind of very relatable for many people. I've heard from people who are older sisters who are like, they feel like they have to be the person who like does everything and takes care of everybody and that kind of thing. And Henry is neurodivergent, which impacts his relationships, with Hallie, or like friendships and things like that. His hockey captainship, and then studies, etc. I think Hannah Grace did well with like building Hallie and Henry like as people, and like in these ways, like the people pleasing eldest daughter, like the neurodivergency and all these kind of things, and ultimately they come together, and that's nice. But I will say that the romance for me wasn't like as palpable as maybe it was in Icebreaker. Icebreaker, of the 3 books I've read from Hannah Grace, Icebreaker is my top one. I thought that one was so excellent. Wildfire I didn't like pretty much at all. Again, I'll link that. Well, I wouldn't say pretty much at all. I just didn't like it. I think kind of because I had Icebreaker such like I was it was so good. I'd come off of it a couple months before, and then I read Wildfire. I was like, kind of waiting for that same kind of thing, and it didn't do the same for me. And I bought Wildfire as well. I'd read Icebreaker, and then I bought the book because I wanted it, and then I bought the book Wildfire before I even read it because I was like, I'm probably going to want the book as well, but I didn't end up liking it. Anyways, in Daydream, let's focus here. I guess I should say, I didn't say already, I give it a 3 out of 5. The romance wasn't as palpable as like an Icebreaker, which I don't think I'll be able to top at this point, potentially. But hey, and maybe it's because like the character types, like, Hallie hadn't really had like a good relationship before Henry, again, being neurodivergent, so maybe that's part of the reason why it wasn't displayed, or I'm not sure, but I still wanted it for them, obviously, and I hoped for them or whatever, but that was it. But yeah, overall, kind of just like simply kind of down the middle on this one. Like I said, kind of compared to the other Maple Hills books, it's like second place for me out of the 3 at this point. So, all right, book. I'm sure there'll be another Maple Hills at some point, and kind of similar to the Emily Henry books, I will be reading whatever comes out. All right, final book here, 6th book for May 2025, and 23rd for the year is The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. I have a lot to say about this one, so let me just start. I gave it a 4 out of 5, and it's a great book. Another book that I'd say is certainly a must-read. Yeah. This is, again, because I have a lot to say and I kind of structured it in a certain way, I'm probably going to just go off of the words I kind of already wrote down on this, because it kind of will help, I think, flow better than kind of me just going off the cuff here. I'll go off the cuff a little bit at the end. So first, it's a must-read for anybody who cares and about the future, and everyone should, so it's one you should be reading. Quote here, "This book tells the story of what happened to Gen Z." I want to point on this right away. So in the introduction, Jonathan Haidt wrote this, and this is what he had said this. And as a final year millennial born in 1996, I found the line immediately intriguing, because technically I'm just outside Gen Z by Pew Research standards, which begins in 1997, which is Pew Researcher of pretty much everybody, Gen Z starts then. But Haidt disagrees and explains why he disagrees. So in the footnote, he says, Pew Research identifies 1997 as the first year of Gen Z, but I believe 1997 is a bit too late. The new behaviors were clear in college students arriving on campus in 2014, which is when I did. Jean Twing chose 1995 as the first year of iGen. I split the difference between the two and chose 1996 for Gen Z. And he goes on to say, like, generations will have like a bright line, that kind of thing. So I think with that though, like thinking about that whole situation, many people have kind of termed some people who were born in the 90s or dubbed us as Zillennials, because we kind of like teeter between two worlds. Like I said, I'm a last year millennial, or in Haidt's eyes, I'm a first year Gen Z. And I think, I grew up in a time, and us 90s kids grew up in a time where technology was advancing, but it wasn't like fully there, like as much as like it is now. Like Instagram, something I'll talk about later, like something like Instagram, I couldn't get that at 10 years old because it didn't come out when I was 10 years old. It came out when I was maybe 12 or 13. It was a couple years later, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's different like now. And even when it came out a little bit later, then it wasn't the Instagram that we have now. It was more of like a purely, I was talking to my sister about this, it was like a purely photo sharing app, and like it's a whole different beast in business now. So yeah, we were growing up just as several key technologies exploded into everyday life, and Anxious Generation captures that shift. But I wanted to kind of note right away, if anybody's like a fellow 96er like I am, wondering why Haidt like grouped this as way, like, hey, I'm not a Gen Z, because that's kind of, first I was kind of like, wait, what's going on? But he explained it, or what his kind of reasoning for that was. So the book is organized into 4 parts. One is the mental health trends among adolescents since 2010, the nature of childhood and how we've disrupted it, the harms of the new phone-based childhood, and what can we do to reverse the damage in families, schools, and society. I will say he's a social psychologist, so he has like, the backing for these kind of things, and that's good. He presents deeply researched and compelling arguments about what he calls the great rewiring of childhood, when he places much of the blame for today's youth mental health crisis on smartphones, social media, and the disappearance of independent, unsupervised play. And he goes about, into those things a lot. And he has 4 foundational reforms that he's talked about, like, are the 4 things that we could do to help children who are growing up today, and like helping raise healthier kids in this digital age. No smartphones before high school. No smartphones before high school. 2 is no social media before age 16. 3, phone-free schools. And 4, far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. Some of these reforms might be controversial or hard to implement, but whether you agree or not, Haight makes a strong case and provides tools and data to support these recommendations. And if you've already been talking about these issues with friends or family, this book gives you research and action steps to kind of get those conversations further and maybe actually act on these things. Several parts of the book, like one thing I will point out, like say like phone-free schools. We talked about each of these kind of reforms in detail. There's something, I don't have children or anything like that, but something I've thought about, and he talks about like some people who are against phone-free schools, because schools oftentimes say phones are not allowed, but they just mean like in class, so kids end up just hiding under their book or whatever it is, they kind of sneak it, or even again in the hallways they could use it, and they're not having that connection. But the whole thing with phone-free schools, he was talking about how like some parents feel like, oh, I need to have my phone, my kids need to have their phone because if there's an emergency. Like in the United States, unfortunately, we've just accepted, which is just ridiculous. I can go down this whole path. Like school shootings are something that's just normalized here, basically. And if there's an emergency like that, you want to have your kid to have your phone, and that's something I've always thought about. Like again, like I said, I don't have children, but I want to be able to get in contact with my child or have them contact me if something happens, or that whole kind of thing. So I think that's a tough one that people deal with. But he also talks about in all these kind of reforms, like having community around it. Like if your community is with the same thing, like, oh, me and my best friend are not going to give our kids smartphones, or we're not going to let our kids have Instagram or whatever it is together, it makes it easier because you don't have as much peer pressure from like going at school and everyone's on Instagram. Well, I have to be on Instagram. Like, what do you mean? Like, I'm going to be isolated if I'm not on these platforms. And this whole thing kind of had me thinking about my own personal upbringing and kind of, again, straddling on that kind of like zillennial line, being a final year millennial, like I said, as Haight terms it, a first year Gen Z, as a 1996er. I was reflecting on my own childhood as I was reading, and after I finished in particular as well. Like, he places me in Gen Z, Haight does, but because many of those kind of tech-based shifts that he kind of describes came a little later for me than maybe someone who was born 5 or 10 years later, like I was mentioning before, like something like I wasn't able to get Instagram at 10 years old because it wasn't around or whatever it was. Like for me, I played outside with my neighbors, I explored, I got bored, the kind of unstructured like time that Haight praises and says that we're lacking today in terms of like, kids. He goes into a whole thing about, kids, how, like you said, parenting wasn't something that we used until like the 1950s. People got more scared about what's happening out there in terms of like maybe the kids being abducted or all types of bad things, which obviously happens, but that made some people like, be more tight on their kids. And my parents certainly were like, on us or like that. But, he was giving examples about how like kids who maybe like get sent out to go to the grocery store or something like that, they can get in trouble now. Parents can get in trouble for like, you left your kid unsupervised, you're neglecting your kid, that whole kind of thing, whatever. So like I had like that time where I actually was going out to the neighborhood, talking to friends, walking around the neighborhood, doing all types of stuff that, people who maybe like now, they just go home and they just go play their Xbox or on their phone or whatever it is, they don't do that as much. So all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I had my first phone at 10. It was not a smartphone, but I had a phone at 10. It was a cherry chocolate, lovely phone. A MacBook at 12, an iPad at 13, and I made a Facebook around that time too, and I'm pretty sure it was around that time because I'm pretty sure I had to add a year to my age to get the Facebook account. Something he talks about as well, about like these sites not having an actual like age verification system, so you can just lie about your age. And I'm pretty sure I was about to turn 13, so I just made myself 13, which is like required age for Facebook. And one of my conditions to getting the Facebook account was my mom having to be my friend. She like made an account, she had it before, something like that. I had to be a friend of hers or I would not be able to have the account. But that groundwork, I think, that kind of, again, having that unsupervised time, that like, unstructured time rather, in terms of like being able to play and like explore and have adventure with kids that some, like you said, again, kids are lacking. And also kind of having my parents be be there in terms of like regulating like my screen usage and things like that, and this like screen, I had like a screen balanced life. Even though I had a phone and an iPad and a computer, whatever like that, it was still very balanced because I had like other things going on, even not even just that, other activities outside of school, things like that, whatever. And social media wasn't omnipresent in my life, because a lot of the time in the early years, because like I said before, like it wasn't even around, or even if it was around, it wasn't as popular as it is today, where it's like everybody has an Instagram. Like I said before, you gotta get Instagram. Everyone has Instagram. How are you not on Instagram? Hello from the edit. Something I wanted to actually talk about, or quickly a story I wanted to share about anxious generation and the whole kind of like the period I grew up in, but also my parents being good in terms of like balancing the screens and stuff like that in our lives. I was thinking about it as I was reading this book, and again reflecting on my childhood. When we were young, me and my sister, my mom got us Game Boys, got us each Game Boys. We never really had like games or anything like that. We didn't have like consoles or anything like that. I'm not sure how old I was, but I was younger, and I'll put a picture of what I kind of remember them looking like. And we had these Game Boys for, it would have been more than a month, but what she ended up doing was she took both of our Game Boys, put them on the driveway, and rolled over them with her car. Sounds extreme, but one of the reasons, now as I got older, one of the reasons my mom did that was because she didn't like how much we were on them, or she didn't like the dependency we had on them. There might have been some other things as well. Maybe she didn't like the game we were playing or whatever it was. So that's like to the level of like parents balancing your life and making sure, we don't like them getting too attached to these devices or whatever it is. I remember saying to her, like, not then, but again as I got older, why couldn't you just hide the Game Boys, or they had to be or give them away, they had to be destroyed. But yeah, that's what my mother did. And we never really had game consoles until I broke my ankle when I was in 8th grade, and a family friend bought me a Wii. And I was talking to my mom about this last night, actually. I was telling her about how I read this book, and I was talking to her about it. And then she was saying how she remembers getting the Wii and being upset, like, oh gosh, there's girls, they have the Wii now. And how noticing how some of that changed in terms of like our play and like playing inside with the Wii. Yeah, we'd have friends over playing and things like that, but kind of how that kind of changed. And we had that Wii for, I still have it actually. It might be operational at some level, but that kind of changed, and that was like the game console we had. Before then we hadn't had anything, and it was a very long time until I got anything else, just for me personally, like a PlayStation I got like after I graduated college. Yeah. But I just want to tell that story about the Game Boys, because whenever I talk to people about that story, it makes people laugh. But again, I was thinking about it in terms of this whole like how my parents like did in terms of like regulating how we were going to interact with screens and devices, and making sure we weren't spending all our time on that. So thanks, Mom, for that, I guess, for that lesson. I'll kick you back to wherever you were in this video. So, but still, even with that buffer of like the age, I felt the shift. I certainly felt the shift when I got to college in 2014, in the autumn of 2014, and the way students socialized had already changed dramatically at that point. Today, it's even more pronounced. Like, have you seen people at dinner lately? Everyone's on their phone looking down, adults and children alike. And when I think about my college experience and how people like socialize through social media or like their smartphones, whatever like that, and how it altered the connection so much, I think about talking to my parents about how college was for them, like their social lives, or even like older family of mine who maybe are only like a 10 years or something like that older than me, like how it was for them, and seeing, I don't know, just like hearing from them. And I had a good time in college and things, but just things were just different, and are different, and are even more so different in terms of how people interact with each other and that whole kind of thing. Overall, anxious generation is something that makes you think about your past, your children, if you have or if you want them, and the world we're building. Hate doesn't just sound the alarm. I think he offers the path forward. And if the warning bells haven't rung for you by the end of this book, you need to go back and read it again. That's really how I feel. I think it's a really great book. I think if I was a parent, I'd want to implement some of these things, as soon as you could do. He was even saying some things he learned as social media and this technology stuff began to grow. Like, he wished he had done some things different with his children when they were growing up, and they had done certain things, whatever. But like you just think about things you could do to, if you have children, or if you have them already, or if you're gonna have them, what you could do to maybe help them in this way. And also just like, again, like I said, specifically, I think if you're like in my age range, maybe in this target demographic he's kind of looking at, thinking about how your upbringing was and like how it was for you, how the people around you were. And this whole book, honestly, he he's talking about like the kind of the mental illness epidemic because of some of these devices and all this new world we're living in. He focuses it on like the age group as a whole, but he goes into girls and boys. He goes into like, it's really quite detailed. Like I said, it's very deeply researched and presents some compelling arguments. And it's, like I said, the alarm has been rung, and something that we should be continuing to talk about because it's not really going to be going away. So yeah, those are the 6 books I read in May 2025. I think it was a good month for reading for me. Some had higher ratings, some had lower ratings, but I think it was a good month. So yeah, that is it from me. I think I've talked enough now. This is one of my longest book videos I've done in a while, but like I said from the beginning, I had a lot to say about some of these books. So thanks for being here and talking to me, or hearing me talk rather, about these books. But if you've read any of them, or if you want to read them, anything like that, comment below, talk to me about them. Give me recommendations. I'm always looking for recommendations for books. Even though I have so many books on my shelves or like on my phone or whatever that I haven't read yet, I'm always taking recommendations, and I might read them. Obviously, if good ones come through, I will read pretty much almost anything. So send me those when you can. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye-bye.